Victor spent 6 years convincing Abigail that a woman with no roots was a woman no one would mourn, until she collapsed into a subway seat beside the one man in the city that even monsters feared. The subway smelled like rain and rust. Abigail Carter gripped the overhead rail with trembling fingers, her knuckles cracking under the pressure. She hadn't planned which train to board. She had simply run out of the apartment, down 4 flights of stairs, and into the first open door she found. Now she sat hunched in the corner seat, her oversized olive jacket pulled tight around her frame. Her dark brown skin was streaked with dried tears and fresh blood from a cut above her left brow. Her natural locks hung damp and loose around her face like a curtain she was hiding behind. She stared at her reflection in the dark window across the aisle. "You are nothing without me, Abigail. Nobody is coming for you." Victor's voice never left her head. 6 years of that voice, 6 years of flinching at footsteps, 6 years of shrinking herself into corners exactly like this one. She pressed 2 fingers against the cut above her brow. The bleeding had slowed, but the throbbing hadn't. "Don't cry, cry! Don't cry!" The train lurched, and Abigail's eyes swept the carriage out of survival habit, scanning for threats, exits, faces. That was when she saw him. He was already watching her. He sat diagonally across from her, one leg crossed over the other, a dark suit jacket draped over his frame like armor. His face was sharp and unreadable, high cheekbones, narrow-focused eyes that caught the fluorescent light like cold glass. Dragon tattoos crawled up his neck and disappeared into the collar of his black shirt. He wasn't looking away. Most people looked away from a bleeding woman on a train. They looked at their phones, their shoes, anywhere but at the inconvenient reality of suffering. He didn't. He looked directly at her, not with pity, not with hunger, but with something far more unsettling. Recognition. Abigail's breath caught. "Who are you?" she thought. The train plunged into darkness as it entered the tunnel. Have you ever felt invisible in a room full of people? Drop a Talsfaring in the comments. This story is about to show you what it means to finally be seen. Here we go. Acts 2-9, cinematic, tight, and emotionally gripping. The train screeched to a halt. Abigail's eyes snapped to the platform window, and her stomach dropped. Victor. He stood under the harsh platform lights, chest heaving, jaw tight. He hadn't just chased her. He had predicted her. His eyes swept the carriage windows like a searchlight until they locked onto hers. His mouth curved into something that wasn't a smile. Abigail's legs refused to move. The doors hissed open. "Don't." One word. Low, quiet, absolute. She turned. The tattooed man had moved. He now sat directly beside her, close enough that she caught his scent, cedar, cold air, and something metallic underneath. "If you run," he said, eyes still forward, "he wins." Victor stepped onto the train. His boots were loud against the floor. His eyes were wild, the specific wildness of a man whose control was slipping. "Abigail." His voice dropped into that dangerous softness she knew too well. "Baby, come home." She felt her body begin to shrink automatically. 6 years of muscle memory pulling her back into smallness. Then she felt it, a hand, steady and warm, pressing lightly against the back of hers. Not grabbing, not commanding. Just there. Victor's eyes dropped to that hand, to the dragon tattoos snaking across the knuckles, and something flickered across his face. Uncertainty. The tattooed man finally turned to look at Victor. He said nothing. He simply looked, with the calm, hollow patience of someone who had buried men for less. Victor took one step back, then another. "Smart," the man beside Abigail murmured. She exhaled for the first time in 6 years. The doors closed. The train moved. Neither of them spoke for a full minute. Abigail stared at her hands. The man, the dangerous, tattooed, impossibly calm man, sat beside her like a wall between her and the rest of the world. "You didn't have to do that," she finally whispered. "I know," he said. "He'll follow this train." "No," the man replied. "He won't." Something in his certainty made her believe him completely, which terrified her more than Victor ever had. "Who are you?" she asked. He reached into his jacket and produced a matte black card. No logo. No email, just 4 letters embossed in silver. Dury. She looked up. That's not an answer. The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, but close. It's the only one that matters tonight. Abigail looked at the card, then at the tattoos crawling up his throat. She had grown up in foster homes, shuffled between strangers, taught to read danger fast. Every instinct she had was screaming that this man was dangerous, but not to her. "Why did you help me?" she asked. Dury looked forward, jaw tight. "Because you boarded my train." "Your train?" He didn't elaborate. The train slowed again, and Dury stood smoothly. He buttoned his jacket with one hand and looked down at her. Not with dominance, but with something quieter. "You have 2 choices," he said. "Stay on this train and wait for him to regroup. Or come with me." Abigail looked at the blood drying on her fingers. She stood up. The car that waited outside wasn't just expensive. It was a declaration, matte black, no plates. 2 men in dark suits standing at attention beside it, their eyes scanning the street with the trained stillness of soldiers. Abigail slid into the back seat. The leather was warm, soft. The door closed, and the city noise vanished completely. Dury sat beside her. He pulled out his phone and typed one message. Within seconds, one of his men outside nodded and disappeared into the rain. What did you just do? Abigail asked. Made sure Victor's car doesn't start for the next 72 hours, Dury said simply. Abigail stared at him. You can't just... I already did. The city blurred past the tinted windows, neon signs, rain-slicked streets, people rushing through the night unaware that in this quiet car, someone's entire life was pivoting on a single decision. The car stopped at the base of a tower that seemed to rise endlessly into the storm clouds. Abigail stepped out and looked up. You live here? I operate here, Dury corrected. Inside, the elevator doors opened to a penthouse that felt more like a war room than a home. Dark concrete walls, screens flickering with city surveillance feeds. Men moving quietly through hallways with the efficiency of people who understood consequences. A woman in a sharp uniform appeared with a medical kit and fresh clothes. Abigail turned to Dury. Why does a man like you have a medical kit ready for someone like me? Dury studied her face, the cut, the bruising, the dried tears. Because men like Victor, he said quietly, are never a surprise. At what point do you think Abigail should trust Dury? Comment below, because what happens next will completely change everything you think you know about him. The guest room was silent and enormous. Abigail sat before the mirror and made herself look, the cut above her brow, the swelling along her jaw, the fingerprint bruises circling her wrist like a bracelet Victor never asked permission to give her. She had spent 6 years making herself smaller, quieter, softer, easier to manage. An orphan with no family to call, no safety net, no one to notice when she disappeared. You have no one, Abigail. You need me. She picked up the medical kit with steady hands and began cleaning the cut herself. Downstairs, she had heard fragments, Dury's voice, low and controlled, issuing commands in Korean. She didn't understand the words, but she understood the tone. This was a man who moved the city like pieces on a board. When she finally emerged, she found him standing alone on the terrace, his back to the door, a cigarette burning between his fingers. You grew up in the system, he said without turning. It wasn't a question. She froze. How did you know that? The way you scanned every exit on the train. He exhaled slowly. Foster children learn to map every room for the fastest way out. I know because I did the same thing. Abigail stepped onto the terrace. The city spread beneath them, glittering and indifferent. You, she said. You were in foster care? Dury turned. In the city light, his tattoos looked like a second skin he had built to replace the one the world had stolen. Until I was 12, he said. Then I decided to stop waiting for someone to choose me. The wind moved between them. Abigail understood then that his fortress wasn't just built of power. It was built of the same hollow loneliness she had been running from her entire life. They sat on opposite ends of a long concrete table, 2 cups of tea between them, the city humming 40 floors below. Victor used to say I was lucky he chose me, Abigail said. Her voice was flat, practiced. The voice of someone who had repeated trauma so many times it lost its texture. He said no one else would want an orphan with no history. Dury's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He weaponized your loneliness, he said. Yes, she wrapped both hands around the cup. And the worst part? For a while, I believed him. Dury was quiet for a long moment. When I was 10, he began, his voice dropping lower, a man took me from a group home. I thought he was saving me. He looked at his hands, at the ink covering every story he had never told anyone. He wasn't. He was recruiting me. He put a weapon in my hand before I knew what grief was. Abigail looked at him, really looked. Beneath the tailored suit and the cold authority was something she recognized immediately, a child who had never been chosen. How did you get out, she asked. I didn't, Dury said simply. I got up. I climbed until I was the one making decisions, until no one could ever put something in my hand again without my permission. Silence settled between them, not awkward, but full, the kind of silence that only forms between people who understand each other's specific brand of damage. You're not what I expected, Abigail said softly. Dury looked at her. Neither are you. For the first time since she had boarded that train, Abigail felt something warm move through her chest. Not safety exactly, something better. Possibility. The knock on Dury's office door was sharp and urgent. His head of security, Min, entered with a tablet. His face was stone, but his eyes were alert. Victor Hudson made contact with the Bach Syndicate, Min said. Dury took the tablet. Surveillance footage showed Victor sitting across from 2 men in a basement. Men whose faces Dury recognized immediately. The Bach Syndicate had been trying to find a crack in his operation for 2 years, and Victor had just handed them a crowbar. He's trading information, Min continued. Police patrol schedules, safe house locations, everything he could pull from his connections. Dury set the tablet down slowly. He's selling out the city just to get her back, he said. Min nodded. They moved tonight. Dury stood and buttoned his jacket. He had built this fortress brick by brick. He had buried enemies quietly and governed the city from the shadows. He had never once let emotion compromise a decision, until tonight. because tonight he had something in this fortress worth protecting that had nothing to do with power. He walked to the guest room and knocked once. Abigail opened the door. She read his face instantly. 6 years of survival had made her fluent in danger. He's coming, she said. Yes, she didn't crumble. She didn't grab for her jacket or start scanning exits. She squared her shoulders and lifted her chin. Then we don't run, she said. Dury looked at her, this woman who had boarded his train bleeding and alone and was now standing in his fortress like she had always belonged there. Something cracked open behind his eyes. No, he agreed quietly. We don't. The penthouse went dark except for the city glow through the floor-to-ceiling glass. Dury's soldiers moved into position, silent as smoke. Men coordinated through earpieces. The elevator was locked, the stairwells sealed. Abigail stood in the center of the main room. Dury approached her. For the first time since the train, he stood close, not to command, not to instruct, but simply to be near her. You should stay behind, he began. No. Her voice was quiet but immovable. He spent 6 years making me watch from behind closed doors. I'm done watching. Dury studied her face. The cut above her brow had scabbed over. Her locks were pulled back. Her dark eyes were steady, not reckless, not afraid, certain. He reached into his jacket and held out a small silver device, a panic trigger that would bring every one of his men to her location in under 30 seconds. If anything moves wrong, he said. She took it. Their fingers touched briefly. Neither pulled away immediately. Dury! Her voice dropped. Why does this feel like you're protecting something that matters to you? He was quiet for a long beat. Because, he said, it does. The elevator indicator began to move. B1, L1, L10, L20. Victor was coming up. Dury stepped back into position, his face sliding back into that cold, unreadable stillness. But Abigail had seen behind it now, and she knew that what lived behind that mask was not emptiness. It was the same fierce, wounded longing she carried in her own chest. The elevator doors opened. Before you go, what part of this story hit you the hardest? Drop it in the comments. And if Abigail's strength reminded you of someone, tag them. They need to see this. Victor stepped out first. He looked terrible, unshaven, wild-eyed, flanked by 4 back syndicate men with weapons drawn. He had traded everything he had for this moment. His eyes found Abigail immediately. It's over, he breathed. Come home, Abigail, right now. Abigail didn't move. She stood in the center of the room, her spine straight, her eyes cutting right through him, just as Dury had taught her. Not with rage, not with fear, with absolute devastating calm. You told me I was nothing without you, she said. Her voice carried across the silent room like a bell. You said no one would ever come looking for a woman with no roots. Victor stepped forward. Abigail, but you were wrong, Victor. She tilted her head slightly because someone did look, and he looked at me like I was worth an entire war. Dury stepped from the shadows. What happened next took 11 seconds. Dury's men emerged from every angle, from hallways, from behind pillars, from positions Victor's allies had never anticipated. The back syndicate men, sensing the catastrophic miscalculation, dropped their weapons before a single shot was fired. Victor stood completely alone, all his borrowed power gone. He looked at Abigail one final time, and she watched the realization move across his face. He had spent 6 years making her feel invisible. He had never once considered that invisibility could be a weapon. She's not yours, Dury said simply. Victor was escorted out. When the elevator doors closed behind him, the room exhaled. Dury walked to Abigail and stopped in front of her. Close. Real. It's done, he said. She looked up at him, this impossible, dangerous, achingly lonely man who had watched her board his train bleeding and alone and had chosen, without hesitation, to become her harbor. Is it? She asked softly. His hand rose and gently, carefully brushed a lock from her face. No, he admitted. I think it's just beginning. And for the first time in 6 years, Abigail smiled, not because she was saved, but because she had finally chosen herself and someone extraordinary had chosen her back. The woman who boarded that train had nothing but a bleeding wound and a red-knitted past. The woman who stood in that penthouse owned something no one could ever take from her again. Herself,